But right now, the humanitarian crisis in Cuba continues. The U.S. Department of Justice formally indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro on criminal charges. Those charges stem from a 1996 shootdown of two civilian planes operated by the Miami-based exile group Brothers to the Rescue. That comes in the midst of rising tensions between the United States and Cuba. Cubans are currently living through fuel shortages and blackouts. Joining us this morning, our good friend here on Tiempo, Vito Echevarria. He's a former journalist with CubaStandard.com. Vito, so good to have you back, my friend. Great. Good to see you. Walk me through this. I mean, what is the significance of a Department of Justice indictment without an operation to bring Raul Castro to the United States to face trial?
Well, it's purely politics. Obviously, they need some kind of justification for some type of intervention in Cuba, whether it's going to be what they did with Maduro, somehow, some way, taking Raul Castro out of Cuba, or something further than that, maybe a full-scale invasion.
Do you anticipate that might happen?
Under Trump, anything goes.
Yeah, sure.
That's the whole point.
Yep. He keeps us on our toes, right? Because you never know. GOP representative, I'm sure you know her, Nicole Maliotakis of Staten Island, who I believe on her mom's side still has family in Cuban.
Yeah.
She worries the Cuban president might flee the island, perhaps to Russia, perhaps to China. I mean, he's 95 years old. Do you see that as a potential reality? Him leaving Cuba?
Yeah, because the mere fact that this blockade, if you will, now has teeth. You know, there's no oil throughout the island, no gasoline. That's a serious problem, and because there's no electricity, so it's really affected the quality of life of the average person there. You know, to the point where you never know what can happen with this regime.
Because you never know what President Trump might do if you're Raul Castro. But back to that question, do you think he cuts out and leaves the island and hides somewhere else?
Anything's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, for the very first time, I think Trump has the Castros running scared.
Let me ask you this. Recap for us, in case people don't know, and we just talked about it there a little bit in the intro, what the federal government alleges regarding Raul Castro's involvement in, this was 30 years ago, the 1996 shootdown of two civilian aircraft killed 4 people, 3 of them Americans. What happened?
Well, the whole thing involved the Brothers to the Rescue group. You know, they were doing flights over, international waters. Usually, I mean, the whole idea was to rescue the Cuban rafters that were trying to make their way from Cuba into the United States. But while they were doing that, they were occasionally flying over Havana itself and dropping leaflets. And that's what the Cuban government had a real problem with, which resulted later on in the shooting down of the planes. Yeah,
and the planes were unarmed civilian planes, correct?
Right.
What do you know about the organization Brothers to the Rescue?
Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, the organization, their purpose was basically to help spot the rafters that were, on international waters and try to get them into South Florida in order to be
people that were leaving
Cuba,
trying to escape Cuba on a boat.
Yeah, the rafter crisis that were going on at the time.
The Cuban government called the organization a narco-terrorist organization, and that the planes were brought down in legitimate self-defense within its jurisdictional waters following repeated and dangerous violations of our airspace by notorious terrorists. Is that jive with the organization that you know?
No. I mean, it was a humanitarian group. The only thing they were doing, once again, was to help spot the rafters that were in the middle of the ocean there and try to get them to South Florida one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, the Cuban government went on to say this was a political, that the Cuban government acted in legitimate self-defense. Again, I mean, not a story that you buy.
The closest thing they could argue is the whole issue of flying, over Havana airspace and dropping off leaflets. I mean, that was what really, upset the Cuban government more than anything.
All right, sit tight. There's much to talk about what's happening or not happening on the island in terms of electricity, power, etc. So sit tight, Vito. When we come back, more on the humanitarian crisis in Cuba and the federal indictment of former Cuban President Raul Castro. Welcome back to Tiempo. The humanitarian crisis in Cuba continues. This while former Cuban President Raul Castro was formally indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice on criminal charges. Those charges again stem from a 1996 shootdown of 2 civilian planes operated by the Miami-based exile group Brothers to the Rescue. And it's all happening while the tensions between the United States and Cuba are on the rise. Cubans are living through fuel shortages and blackouts. Here to educate us a little bit more, Vito Echevarria, former journalist with thecubastandard.com. Share with me an example of what life is like for the typical Cuban right now on the island.
Anything to do with transportation is where people get hit the hardest because of the fact that Trump has blocked off Venezuelan oil and has threatened other countries like Mexico with tariffs if they even think of supplying Cuba with oil right now.
Okay, so no oil means no power, means blackouts.
No transportation.
No transportation, so you can't drive a car if you can't put gas in it.
To the point where people have to resort to bicycles and other gasoline means to get around.
To get around.
Yeah.
Vito, what are hospitals doing? What are hotels doing? To keep the lights on.
It's very difficult. Yeah, I mean, obviously the hotels, they may have some more resources in order to deal with it, but even they, I would imagine, they're going through some serious problems.
Yeah, I mean, even if you have a generator, you got to put gas in the generator at some point, right?
I mean, so it's very tough there. This blockade, if you will, now has some real teeth.
Yes, that was my next question, because the blockade has been in place for a while. But you were just telling me that now it's got some meaning and some teeth behind it, whereas it didn't so much with previous administrations.
Well, I mean, the Cuban government has always found a way to get around economic sanctions. That's why the Cuban government had to deal with third countries here and there to get around the blockade, if you will. But thanks to the cutoff of the gasoline, of oil, now it has some real teeth.
Okay. Yeah. Tourism, I would imagine.
Gone downhill.
Tanked,
big time.
Which was a big source of income for...
Huge source of income,
for the economy.
That's what helped the...
Have you bumped into or talked to Cubans who are leaving now?
Yeah, I'm on the phone with these folks. They've made their way to the United States one way or the other. They flew in through countries in which there's no visa requirements, such as Nicaragua, for example. And, basically, one way or the other, they're making their way here to America.
Yes.
Because it's just what it is.
But they know what's happening at our southern border right now in terms of the fact that, under this administration, nobody's getting in, not without the proper documentation.
Yeah, but these folks will find a way to get in one way or the other, because the challenges that they have to deal with coming into the United States are minimal compared to what they're dealing with back home.
Yes, right. And that's the reasoning they're leaving, right? They tell you there's, forget opportunity, there's just nothing available.
No hay nada.
Nada. No hay nada.
No, nada.
We mentioned you were a former journalist with CubaStandard.com, which was a website that was focused on, what, economic development and business on the island.
Yeah, mainly foreign companies doing some type of activity with Cuba. So obviously, a lot of those activities are a standstill or significantly reduced.
Yes.
Until further notice.
So you don't see CubaStandard.com or any other publication resurrecting itself with things being the way they are now?
Not until the two governments resolve things to the point where the Cuban economy can be revitalized again. However, that's going to be worked out through the Trump administration.
Yes. Yeah. The Trump administration has indicated, whether you believe President Trump or not, that he's willing to help Cuba. I don't know in what way or what manner, but from your perspective, what can this administration do if, in fact, that's true, wants to provide some assistance?
I mean, obviously, they want to create the conditions for the Cuban government to provide a soft exit, if you will, so that there's more capitalism, more of a private sector, if you will, and some other forms of, political reforms, if you will.
You see that happening? I still see them waving the socialism banner, and I don't anticipate changes in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one situation in which, the Cuban government may have to do something, because this can't go on forever.
Can't go on. Yeah. Vito, good to see you again, my friend. Thank you so much for educating us on the way things are in Cuba, and let's hope things turned around for the people there soon.
Exactly.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Un placer, señor.